Welcome back to the Eclectic, where we trace the stories that sit in history's half-light, the ones built from records and rumours, certainty and distortion, human behaviour and human denial. This episode is not uncomfortable. It's not spooky fun. It's not a neat mystery with a clever ending. It's the story of Gilles de Rais, a man remembered as both war hero and child killer, and a case that forces us to hold two truths at once: that medieval courts could be politically hungry, and that monstrous violence can still be very real. Gilles de Rais was born in September or October of 1404 into the powerful Montmorency-Laval network, a family whose name was not just heritage, but leverage. He inherited and accumulated land across western France, Brittany, Anjou, Poitou, Maine, a patchwork of estates and strongholds that made him extraordinarily wealthy, influential, and crucially, difficult to control. His titles included Baron de Rais, or Retz, and he was associated with castles like Terfouge and Champtos, places that will matter later, not as scenery, but as settings where allegations gather. He was orphaned young and raised under old relatives, common enough in noble houses. The main question wasn't how loved is this child, but how useful will this heir be? From the beginning, Gilles is not framed by ordinary constraints. He grows up in a world where violence is normal, power is inherited, and many consequences are negotiable. That doesn't create a criminal, but it does create someone who can move through life with very few people able or willing to stop him. By the 1420s, France is fractured by the 100 Years' War and the internal rivalries. Gilles is still young, but already in military roles, first in local conflicts linked to Brittany, then against English positions on contested frontiers. This is where the first version of him takes shape. Gilles the commander, bold, aggressive, theatrically courageous, the kind of man chroniclers like because he reads well on parchment. Then comes 1429, the year that burns itself into French memory. Joan of Arc enters the story, not as a footnote, but as a force. Gilles de Rais becomes part of her orbit. He fights with her at Orleans and in the Loire campaign that follows. Battles that turn into legend while they're still happening. At Reims, on the 17th of July, 1429, during Charles VII's coronation, Gilles is made Marshal of France. Picture that moment. Cathedral stone, banners, oil and incense, the weight of ritual, and a young lord being raised into the top tier of military authority. This matters because later, when the case collapses into horror, people will ask, could a monster stand in that place? History's answer is always the same. Monsters don't arrive with horns. They arrive with credentials. Joan is captured in 1430 and executed in 1431. After the early 1430s, Gilles' prominence in active campaigning fades. That's not strange. Many commanders drift into the estate management, regional politics, or court life. But with Gilles, the move away from war doesn't look like settling. It looks like turning inward, into the private world of his properties, his household, his spending, his obsessions. And this is where the second version of the story begins, not with blood, but with money. In the 1430s, Gilles lives lavishly. Not comfortable, noble lavish, spectacle lavish. He maintains a huge household and pours money into religious display and public theatre, mystery plays, grand productions, processions, art and devotion braided together in ways that make him look pious, cultured, and important. But the spending is not sustainable. He begins selling and mortgaging estates at a pace that alarms his relatives. Not only because it's financially reckless, but because land is important. When a noble sells land, he's selling the thing that makes him noble. By the mid-1430s, higher authorities intervene to stop him alienating what remains. It's a sign of how extreme things have become. This isn't the state rescuing him out of kindness. It's the state, and his family, trying to prevent a powerful lord from self-destructing in ways that destabilize everything around him. For Gilles, that intervention has a consequence. It closes off the easiest path to cash. If you're a man addicted to grandeur, and you can't keep selling pieces of yourself to fund it, you start looking for other doors. Around this period, trial records and later summaries place Gilles turning towards alchemy and ritual magic, not as a Gothic hobby, but as a solution. He wants restored fortune. He wants power that doesn't depend on royal favour or relatives' patience. Into this space steps François Prelati, a young Italian cleric alchemist figure in the record, associated with demon summoning rites and a demon name that will echo through the proceedings, Baron. The surviving descriptions of these rites, circles, pacts, offerings, are some of the most sensational parts of the case, and also some of the most historically delicate, because they come from judicial settings designed to produce exactly this kind of material. That doesn't mean none of it happened. It means this is a world where confession can be shaped by expectation, and where prosecutors know what kind of story plays well in a heresy trial. So we hold two things at once. Gilles appears, by multiple accounts, to have pursued occult help as his fortune collapsed. The specifics we see are filtered through records made under pressure, in a time when demonology was a legal language as much as a belief. The arc, though, is clear. Wealth, ruin, desperation, alternative methods. That's the structural story. Then comes the human story, the one that makes his name infamous. Because in the later allegations, Gilles' household doesn't just chase demons, it hunts children. Here's what the 15th century proceedings and later summaries converge on in broad strokes. After the early 1430s, witnesses and records accuse Gilles de Rais of abducting numerous peasant children, often boys aged roughly 7 to 14, from areas around his castles, especially near Tufuge and Machecoul, using servants to lure or seize them. The allegations describe sexual abuse, torture, and murder, with bodies hidden by burning or burial, and with numbers that are both horrifying and slippery. The ecclesiastical proceedings mention roughly 140 victims, but the surviving evidence doesn't allow a precise total to be confirmed. This is where people tend to fall into extremes. Either he's pure invention, a scapegoat sacrificed for land, or every lurid detail exact, literal truth. Responsible history sits in a harder place. The record is strong enough that many historians accept he committed grave crimes, but the trial context is political and coercive enough that we have to be careful about treating every detail as clean, modern-style evidence. That caution matters because the mechanism that finally brings Gilles down isn't, at first, missing children. It's something more medieval, something that gives authorities a clean legal handle, a violent clash with the church. By the late summer of 1440, pressure around Gilles had been building for months. Rumours have circulated for years, whispers about missing children near his estates, strange rituals, the unsettling atmosphere around some of his castles. But rumours alone are rarely enough to bring down a powerful nobleman. What changes is a conflict with the church. At Saint Etienne de Montmartre, Gilles becomes involved in a violent dispute with the cleric. In the course of that confrontation, he reportedly seizes the priest and removes him from sanctuary, a serious violation of ecclesiastical privilege. In medieval Europe, attacking a member of the clergy is not just a local dispute. It's an offence that gives church authorities a clear right to intervene. For the Duke of Brittany, already uneasy about Gilles' behaviour and financial instability, this incident provides the opening needed to act. On the 15th of September 1440, Gilles de Rais is arrested and taken to Nantes. Once there, he faces something unusual, even by medieval standards. 2 courts, 2 investigations, both moving toward the same man. The proceedings in Nantes are divided between an ecclesiastical court and a secular ducal court. The church tribunal, overseen by the Bishop of Nantes and inquisitorial officials, focuses on religious crimes. Heresy, demon invocation, sodomy, scandal, and the torture and murder of children framed as sins against God. The secular court, under the Duke of Brittany's authority, addresses temporal crimes, abduction, murder, violence against clergy. Between the 2 systems, the charges cover both the spiritual and physical dimensions of his alleged offences. In practical terms, this means Gilles is surrounded. If one court falters, the other can still proceed. At the beginning of the trial, Gilles does not act like a man preparing to confess. He challenges the authority of the ecclesiastical judges. He refuses to answer certain questions, and at one point he reportedly declares that he would rather be hanged than submit to the court's demands. It's bold, it's also dangerous, because the church has tools that are not purely legal. They have spiritual weapons, and they use one of them. When Gilles continues refusing to cooperate, the court excommunicates him. From a modern distance, that might sound symbolic. In the 15th century, it is devastating. Excommunication means separation from the church and from the sacraments believed necessary for salvation. For a medieval Christian nobleman, the prospect of dying outside the church is terrifying. Combined with the looming threat of torture, it puts Gilles in an extremely vulnerable position. The tone of the trial begins to change. As the hearings progress, the courts begin calling witnesses. Parents speak about children who disappeared after visiting or working near Gilles' estates. Villages near Tefouche and Machecoul describe servants from his household approaching young boys. Members of Gilles' own retinue are questioned. Among the most important are 2 close servants, André Griat and Etienne Poutou-Croilat. Their testimony paints a disturbing picture. According to their statements, children are lured to the castles with promises of work, food, or small gifts. Once inside, they are taken to private chambers. The servants describe abuse, murder, and the burning or concealment of bodies. These accounts form the backbone of the prosecution's case. They are detailed enough that the court cannot easily dismiss them. Alongside the accusations of murder runs another thread, the involvement of François Prelati. Prelati, a young cleric from Florence, enters Gilles' household in the late 1430s, claiming knowledge of alchemy and ritual magic. According to testimony, Gilles believes supernatural forces might restore his fortunes. Prelati describes attempts to summon a demon called Baron. Circles are drawn, written pacts are prepared. Reportedly writes a promise offering the demon whatever it demands, with 2 exceptions, his soul and his life. The hope is that Baron will grant wealth, power, or hidden knowledge. According to the testimony, nothing reliably supernatural happens. No demon appears, no treasure emerges, only frustration. One of the most shocking claims connects these rituals to offerings. In some accounts, Prelati says that after repeated failures, he told Gilles the demon demanded a more serious tribute, parts of a child's body. A glass vessel containing a child's hand, eyes, heart, and blood is said to have been prepared for an evocation ceremony. Even that, the story goes, produces no visible result. Whether this is literal, exaggerated, or shaped by inquisitorial expectations is debated by modern historians. But in the courtroom at Nantes, it reinforces the image the prosecution wants, Gilles as both murderer and sorcerer. For several days, Gilles maintains his resistance. Then on the 20th of October, 1440, the situation shifts. The prosecutor reminds him the court now has explicit authority to use torture to bring the truth to light. The threat is no longer theoretical. The instruments are close at hand. Gilles knows what they can do. Instead of walking into the torture chamber, he makes a request. He asks to confess privately in an upper room of the castle where the trial is being held. Officials from both courts accompany him. A notary records what follows. In that room, Gilles de Rais begins to speak. The statement he gives is long and detailed. He admits to abducting numerous children, mostly boys, some girls. He describes acts of sexual abuse and murder. He explains that the killings were driven by what he calls carnal delight. He insists that the crimes were committed by his own will, not as sacrifices demanded by demons. That distinction may matter to him. Separating the murders from formal heresy could, in theory, affect how his soul is judged, even if it doesn't change the earthly sentence. He also admits to participating in occult rituals with prelati, attempts to gain wealth through supernatural means. But the central horror of the confession remains the killings. The written record is later read aloud in open court. Gilles does not retract it. After the confession is presented, something striking happens. Gilles expresses contrition. He weeps. He asks the court and God for forgiveness. He begs to be reconciled with the church. The judges agree. His excommunication is lifted so that he can die within the Christian community. For medieval observers, this is enormous. A condemned man who genuinely repents can still hope for salvation. Once the confession is in place, events move quickly. The secular court confirms the murder charges. The ecclesiastical court confirms the heresy and related offences. Both agree on the punishment. Gilles de Rais will be hanged and his body burned. His accomplices, Henri and Poitou, receive the same sentence. The date is set, 26th of October, 1440. On that morning, the former Marshal of France will be taken to the place of execution outside Nantes. The final chapter of his life will unfold, not in armour beside a saint, but at the foot of a gallows. The morning of the execution. On the 26th of October, 1440, a crowd gathers outside the city of Nantes for public events. They are meant to be seen. They are meant to teach. The man being led to the scaffold that morning is no ordinary criminal. Gilles de Rais has once ridden in royal ceremonies. He has fought beside one of the most famous figures in French history. He has been named Marshal of France in a cathedral full of nobles and bishops. Now he walks toward the gallows. With him are Henri Griat and Etienne Poitou Croillat, the two servants whose testimony has helped build the case and who have been condemned alongside him. The sentence is clear. They will be hanged, then their bodies will be burned. According to contemporary accounts, Gilles addresses the crowd before the execution. The words vary slightly between sources, but the themes are consistent. He acknowledges his crimes. He speaks of repentance. He urges parents to raise their children carefully and within the guidance of the church, so they will not fall into the kind of moral corruption he says destroyed him. It is a striking scene. A man who once commanded armies, now presenting himself as a cautionary tale. Whether this reflects genuine remorse or a final performance shaped by the expectations of the time is impossible to know. But the effect on the crowd, by most reports, is powerful. Witnesses describe him as composed, penitent, almost serene, a stark contrast to the horrors outlined during the trial. The execution follows the pattern ordered by the courts. Gilles de Rais and his two servants are taken to the gallows. They are hanged. Once death is confirmed, their bodies are lowered. The remains are placed upon a pyre and set alight. In Gilles' case, the burning is not allowed to completely consume the body. Because his repentance has restored him to the church, local noblewomen reportedly intervene, asking that his remains be treated with some dignity. His partially burned body is taken from the fire and buried in consecrated ground. Even in death, his status has not entirely vanished. The execution ends his life. It does not end the story. In the decades that follow, the name Gilles de Rais spreads far beyond the region where he lived. The elements of the case, a powerful nobleman accused of horrific crimes, rumours of occult rituals, missing children, secret chambers, are exactly the sort of material medieval and early modern storytellers seize on. Over time, historians and folklorists notice something else. The story of Gilles de Rais resembles another tale that appears in European folklore, the story that becomes known as Bluebeard. Bluebeard, popularised later by Charles Perrault, is the tale of a wealthy lord who kills his wives and hides their bodies in a forbidden room. The connection is not exact. Bluebeard murders wives. Gilles is accused of murdering children. But the thematic similarities are hard to ignore. A powerful nobleman, a hidden series of killings, forbidden rooms, a secret that eventually comes to light. Whether Gilles directly inspires the Bluebeard legend, or is retrofitted into it later, remains debated. But in the popular imagination, the two stories eventually blur. Gilles' image shifts again, from historical criminal to something closer to folklore. For centuries, most writers accept the trial's conclusions without much question. Gilles de Rais is remembered as a monstrous criminal whose downfall represents justice finally catching up with power. In the 20th century, some historians and writers began to push back. Medieval trials are not modern legal proceedings. Confessions are often obtained under threat of torture, and witness testimony can be shaped by political pressure. And powerful nobles sometimes have enemies who stand to gain from their ruin. A few revisionist authors argue that Gilles may have been the victim of conspiracy. In their view, powerful figures in Brittany and the church have financial and political motives. His lands are extensive. His behaviour has alienated the crown and his family, and his arrest, conveniently, allows authorities to dismantle his power and redistribute his estates. Some go further, suggesting the crimes themselves were exaggerated or invented. Most modern historians take a more cautious middle path. They recognise the political context and the flaws of medieval justice, but they also point out that the evidence against Gilles is substantial. Numerous witnesses testify independently. Members of his own household describe the crimes in detail. And Gilles' confession, while obtained under heavy pressure, goes beyond what the prosecutors strictly need to secure a conviction. For these reasons, many scholars believe that serious crimes did occur, even if the exact scale and some details are uncertain. The court records mention around 140 victims, but that figure likely reflects estimates, not a verified account. What seems clear is that Gilles de Rais is one of the earliest well-documented cases of a high-ranking noble tried and executed for serial crimes against children. That alone would have given him a dark place in history. Few figures show the contradiction of the medieval world as sharply as Gilles de Rais. He is a hero of the 100 Years' War, a companion in arms to Joan of Arc, a man trusted with one of the highest military ranks in France. And yet, within little more than a decade, he stands condemned as a murderer and heretic. This transformation raises uncomfortable questions. Was the brutality always there, hidden beneath rank and title? Did the chaos of war shape a man who could not return to ordinary life? Or did wealth and power simply give him the freedom to pursue impulses others had to suppress? History rarely gives clean answers, but it preserves enough evidence to force us to ask. Today, Gilles de Rais occupies a strange place in historical memory. He appears in studies of medieval warfare, in criminal history, in discussions of Bluebeard, and in debates about how reliable medieval trials really were. In western France, the castles associated with him, Tiffauges, Chantos, Machecoul, still stand in various forms. Tourists visit them, historians study them, and the shadow of his story lingers, a reminder that the past is rarely simple. The story of Gilles de Rais is disturbing not only because of the crimes described, it's disturbing because of the contradictions it contains. A dedicated war hero, a man who rode beside a saint, a noble whose wealth and power seemed almost unlimited, and yet a figure remembered primarily for the darkness that followed. We like to separate heroes from monsters, but sometimes the same person occupies both roles. When that happens, the result is not a neat moral lesson. It's something far more unsettling. Gilles de Rais died in 1440, but the questions surrounding his life never entirely disappeared. Was he exactly the monster described in the trial records? Or a man whose crimes were magnified by politics and fear? The surviving documents leave room for debate, but they also leave behind a case that has echoed for nearly 6 centuries, a case where legend, justice, and horror intersect. You've been listening to The Eclectic, where history's strangest stories are explored with curiosity, caution, and a willingness to sit with uncertainty. If you found this story compelling, please follow, rate, and share the show. That helps others discover these deep dives into the stranger corners of history. And if you have a family legend of your own, half truth, half ghost story, I'd love to hear it. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and as always, stay eclectic.